Welcome again to another episode of NAIOP Utah. My name is Jade Teran, and I am the marketing chair for the NAIOP board here in Salt Lake City. And my day job is I work for FFKR Architects. And we are joined today by Utah's top contractors for this contractor episode of NAIOP Utah's webinars. Josh, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you, and why don't you get us started with some introductions?
Awesome. Thanks, Jade. Yeah, I'm Josh Caldwell. I'm with Mortenson and excited to be here to talk to some of my colleagues in the construction industry about what we're seeing in the climate today in Utah as it relates to construction. Really quickly want to introduce my colleagues here. Jeff Palmer, who's with Layton Construction, Dennis Cigana. Dennis, did I say that right?
Sure. Yes, Dennis Cigana.
There we go. Dennis Cigana with Jacobsen and Braden Moore with Big D Construction. So thank you guys all for being here. Excited to have this conversation and interested to see what comes of it. So to go ahead and get started then, guys, again, this is a question that we're going to have for all of you, and please feel free and open to discuss freely. But I am going to throw each one of these to somebody directly so that we get some amount of cadence. But Jeff, it seems construction is going strong and jobs have been retained. How is Layton seeing this play out with all of your projects as it relates to COVID-19?
Thanks, Josh. You know, as I was preparing for this call, I couldn't help but think of how just a couple months ago, a few of us were on the stage at the NAIOP symposium talking about the current markets and what we were experiencing. And the overall theme of the conference was everyone is busy. And that just seems forever ago. We enter a different time, and each of us are experiencing the different challenges COVID's brought to us. So yes, things are still going strong. You know, in that symposium, we talked about just how busy we all were. And thank goodness as contractors, we can continue to ride that wave that brings. Obviously, the future is softening up. And I was looking at the AIA ABI score, where a 50 means no change. Anything above 50 is increased. So in February, all the scores were 50. In March, all the AIA scores that reflect new buildings and new contracts with architects plummeted down into the 30s, which indicates for a contractor, we have interesting days ahead. I think, are still busy, at least Layton is, here in Utah as well as across the country, but in the coming months, with architects slowing down immediately now, it's obviously going to be a different ballgame here in the months to come. So we're preparing for that. The biggest hits we've had are in retail. That's no surprise. Healthcare, we've had one of our healthcare clients close down all their projects across the country, as well as our sister company, STO Construction, up in New York. They've had all their projects come to a complete halt. That's brought interesting learning experiences for each of us, because we can experience it on the East Coast first and make plans here in Utah. So that has been a benefit to us, but that's really where we're seeing a change. But in Utah, I think you guys would probably say the same. Construction's still strong. We're still seeing projects move forward, and the immediate future is still as bright as it has ever been.
Yeah, Jeff, I would second virtually everything you just said there. I know, speaking for Mortenson, it's both regionally affected, you know, situationally across the country, as well as there are certain industries that we work in that tend to have been more or less impacted. For us, it's really, we're seeing a lot of work in both the healthcare and hospitality industries that have been incredibly impacted, mostly to the negative. Though I would say on the healthcare side, I mean, certainly there's a negative impact, but also there's been a lot of repositioning in terms of what their focus has been, and taking some of the resources that generally would be part of their real estate design and construction resources and pivoting those towards the frontline need addressing the pandemic, right? And so you're seeing a lot of field hospitals popping up, and you're seeing a lot of addressing of repositioning old or unused physical assets and facilities in order to kind of combat this pandemic. So we're seeing a lot of similar things. Braden, Dennis, are you guys seeing anything different?
Pretty much is the same as what you guys are seeing. Jacobsen's 90% of our work is along the Wasatch Front. We do have some work in Hawaii and Texas. But for the most part, all our projects that we have, none of them have actually ceased or stopped construction, so they're all ongoing. With regards to projects that were slated to get going, we did have a hospitality project up in the mountains that is put on hold. And then we had another developer project in Salt Lake City that was in pre-con, but very conceptual at this time, that has been put on hold also. But other than that, all our projects have been moving forward. It's been pretty strong in terms of keeping the momentum going, and pretty optimistic out there.
Yeah, I would echo what everyone has said. I think that analyzing the projects that have continued to move forward are the ones that were previously funded, right? I think a lot has to do with the financing of the project. And if the project had already been funded or it's underway, all of those projects are continuing to move forward. If they were in the design phase, yet they weren't completely funded yet, a lot of those projects have paused. And I don't think they're pausing indefinitely. I think it's kind of wait and see at this point. That's in Utah and our other offices as well. Obviously, Utah is a stronger market. I think a lot because it has to do with our leadership in the state of Utah to keep everyone going and make sure that it doesn't have a humongous economic impact, but also keeping people safe. But other offices, Las Vegas especially, has been affected, where most of the operations of anything in Las Vegas is shut down. So just depends on the city, the market. But I think, you know, if we putting a line in the sand, if the project's been funded already, those are still moving forward.
Yeah, if I was to add anything, I would just say it feels like a lot of our activity, and it sounds like the same for you guys. It's more of a slowdown. It's more of a let's pause and wait and see, and less of a let's, you know, indefinitely shelve a project, with maybe the exception being hospitality, and it sounds like maybe retail. They're all pretty significantly hit. What changes have you guys implemented as far as just keeping people safe? Braden, I'm going to throw this one to you first. Whether it's on site, whether it's off site throughout the company, what sort of changes have you guys seen that have been, you know, you could significantly consider were COVID-19 related changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's been obviously crazy for everyone in the world, right? And as the you know, February, March started rolling around, and we're learning more and more every single day, we obviously started adopting things each day a little differently. We asked anyone that could stay home to stay home, work from home for, you know, for a month, about a month and a half. But you can't paint a building at home, right? As we all know. So those job sites that are still going, and we didn't shut any job sites down. We didn't have any job sites to shut down. We haven't had any positive cases, which has been great, and we're thankful for that. But on the job sites, we've, you know, much like I'm sure all of you, we've implemented that everyone has to wear a mask. We're keeping distancing, as been suggested. The job sites, such as the airport, where we have a lot of labor, we've also implemented temperature gauging, so making sure that no one has a temperature or is sick on the site. And if they are, they go home and they stay there indefinitely until they're cleared. And we have adopted processes and procedures for that, to keep people safe, making sure that, you know, one, they can provide for their families, but more importantly, that they're safe while they're doing so.
I can second that too with Jacobsen. Back in March, mid-March, we implemented a strategic risk management team and started meeting daily to ensure that we followed CDC guidelines and that our people on the site were safe. We monitored our people's health. We implemented an emergency leave program. if people were impacted, not directly by contacting or getting the COVID-19, but people that have health or are high at risk for the CDC, or that have children at home that didn't have a location where they could, now that schools were closed, that they didn't have the childcare support. So, when people were concerned if they had to show up to work, this program allowed them to be paid while they were off, so that people didn't show up because they had to show up, and that was a positive thing that we enacted. We also included, because of some of our remote sites, we've had some town hall meetings and brought in the people from Hawaii and Texas, and since we're out of Salt Lake City, just to inform them, let them be aware of what we're doing, and keep them up with what Jacobsen is doing moving forward. I think you mentioned, for the most part, and what we're doing right now is telecommuting, many of us, and leveraging the technologies. I head up our pre-construction arm at Jacobsen Construction, and we actually bid 3 projects remotely with our software. Didn't have to show up to the office. So as Braden mentioned, a lot of our people were telecommuting. People that can stay home are staying home, and it's worked out pretty successfully. I think we may see a change in the future, incorporating some of these things that have worked positively for us. And it's also happening on the project site. Some of our big projects where we have multiple supervision out there, we're allowing them to stagger their time or work hours, and allowing them to work from home as long as we've got the right coverage on the site. And again, our sites are up with technology, so they're doing a lot of video conferencing as well.
One thing I would add, I think working from home has been an adjustment, but I'm also looking forward to seeing what kind of adjustments we all have to have when we go back to the office. For example, not wearing shorts or t-shirts, right? How many of us are wearing shorts as we speak today? But we've really had to treat our employees' health as we've always treated our employees' safety. It's in the same discussion nowadays as we begin each project. And it's really been interesting. We've done many of the same things each of you have done, I'm sure, on a daily basis on the job site. But one, I've seen where contractors here in Utah have come together to figure out, how do we keep our subcontractors, our employees, safe on the job site. We've had several calls with our competitors trying to understand the new guidelines from the county and what does it mean? How can we work together to keep our subcontractors safe? And then it's given me a huge additional respect to our guys who are on the front lines every day. I had the luxury of working from home on most days, but a lot of people do not have that luxury and go to the job site every day, and are having to learn how to do construction activities 6 feet away from their coworker, and that's been a challenge and a learning lesson. So it'll be interesting to see how we move forward in those respects.
Yeah, I could second again. It sounds like all of us are pretty much in tune with the same wavelength here, and I would say, to your comment, Jeff. First of all, I'm laced up from the waist up, just like you are. So there's a lot of shorts wearing going on across the board, I think. But also, it's we were talking about this at Mortenson the other day. Is there's just kind of this idea of positive flexibility. Speaking of, and there's an obvious impact in construction, especially about how all of this therefore impacts what our labor forces are looking like. Dennis, can you speak to how labor forces, what the challenges are in Utah as it relates to COVID-19?
Well, sure. I guess like Jeff indicated earlier, several months back, we were all gung-ho with a lot of work coming up and trying to fill the void of some of the projects we knew were coming online. I mentioned one big project that we had, hospitality up in the mountains that has been put on hold. We were ready to ramp up and break ground on that one and increase our concrete crews. With that, it's kind of relieved some of the pressure in terms of us having to go out and find those people. We're going to have a very good year still this year, and our concrete is still going to be up compared to what it typically is. So we've been able to keep the crews that we currently have pretty much occupied and busy. On the healthcare side, it was mentioned earlier, we don't have any large healthcare projects that have been put on hold, but because of elective surgeries not moving forward and that revenue source for the healthcare systems, we're seeing some of those smaller projects locally in the healthcare being shelved for the time being. But with regards to labor, it's helped us it's helped us in terms of not having to go out and find additional labor to man up the forces. Our people are showing up. The labor hasn't been impacted too much by COVID-19. We have a couple people that haven't showed up here and there intermittently, but it hasn't impacted our schedules in any way either.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that right before this all happened, right, we had a huge labor shortage. I mean, it was discussed in every panel, every meeting that was going on, is that there's a huge labor shortage, and how do we get our projects from pushing to the right while still, keeping promises to owners. And it's almost like those are some trades that's still there, but other trades it's not, right? Other trades we have subs calling us and saying, hey, I don't have as many projects as I once did. I could really use, a job here or there. Could you help me out? So it's really trade by trade and almost market by market with the labor. And it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward, because we did have such a labor shortage in our market that it was tough for all of us to find labor on certain trades. And I think that's loosened a little bit, but I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball. Who knows? Is that going to continue, or is that something that as soon as, we're opening back up our country, that we have those same labor shortages? So that'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Braden, maybe I can add to that. I would agree with what you stated there. I think the projects that have been put on hold and that aren't moving forward, for the most part, regionally, are projects that were slated to start this month or the next 4 to 5 months. Right. So with that being said, I guess in the next 4 to 5 months, we may see a little bit. I agree with what you're saying with regard to subcontractors calling us. They're looking for work. So we may see a little bit of more of a labor pool out there for the subcontractors and ourselves in the next 6 months. But we haven't experienced that in the last 2 to 3 months, I would say.
Agreed.
It feels like there's been some amount of certainly want to stop short of saying that there's no longer a labor issue, because I agree with what you're saying, Braden, that it's still a pretty tight labor market. But it does feel like that, especially due to some of the relaxing of the schedules as they're slowing down to evaluate what's happening in this market, that you're also seeing that that's obviously impacting to some degree what that labor demand wants to look like. And so I think certainly from what we're seeing, and a lot of this too is really market dependent. We're seeing some markets like Utah where it feels, even though there's an impact, there's still a really strong, healthy economy. And we're still seeing a lot of demand on the trades, whereas some of the other markets that we work in across the country that seem to have had a deeper impact negatively from COVID-19, as the projects there are all kind of coming to a halt, you're obviously seeing, an impact on the trades, which is freeing up of what has been a large demand. But on the flip side, I would say, just like internally, this is teaching us how to learn our technology better and become more efficient with our communication and our coordination by way of remote access and by way of the technologies that we have available. It's doing the same for our trades.
One thing I would add there, Josh, is each of you know how important our subcontractors are, and we need to take care of them because construction can't happen without them, right? They're our biggest asset. We haven't seen this in Utah, but in some of the markets across the country, we've actually had to hold seminars and help the subcontractor base understand what loan programs are available to them as things have shut down, because I think they'll feel the effect much sooner than the general contractor will, and they'll have a harder time with the cash flow. So if we can help them be successful, ultimately all of our jobs will be that much more successful. So that's one thing I worry about in the future if things do slow down, is just how quickly this changed, and I think it'll catch some of our subcontractors by surprise. And if we can help them understand what resources they have to them to succeed, we'll be better off because of that.
It's a good point you're making, Jeff, and kind of to that point and elongating it a little bit, how obviously this is impacting our operations, it's impacting our trades, like you mentioned, and of course, all of our clients and partners. But what are you seeing as far as the deadlines on those projects? We've kind of alluded to it. There's, in my opinion, a short-term impact, and then what you've alluded to is there's a greater, longer-term, maybe unknown impact at some point. And how does Layton view what that impact might be towards these deadlines?
So I think you or someone else had mentioned it earlier, how specific aspects of the job have to be expanded over a course of 24 hours, for example, in order to keep social distancing. And so that has the potential to impact the schedule. Other areas, for example, yesterday, carpet, we had our carpet vendor reach out and say times have extended for lead time on carpet, something you just take for granted, right? In talking to mechanical, it hasn't quite hit yet, but they are expecting cost increases on their equipment as well as their fixtures, as well as up to double the lead time on those items. So it just requires more additional communication with our clients for that predictable outcome we're trying to achieve. Right now, none of our schedules have pushed. We still feel comfortable with where we are in each of those. But some of the other things we've seen delayed so far are light fixtures, security glass, and oftentimes it just comes down to a plant closing for a day or two while they have a scare. They think maybe one of their employees has COVID, so they had to shut it down, do the testing, do the cleaning, then open it up. You do that a couple times and you'll see an impact of material on site. So that's what we're seeing. Nothing drastic yet, but as each of us know, each day is a month or a year, it seems like. And what happens today is far different than what we might be able to expect tomorrow.
You know, that the point you made there, I think, is incredibly acute, which is there's a larger global, and this is a pandemic, right? And it's impacting everybody. And there's an impact to us, which is directly related to how our supply chain for some of those materials that you're talking about is impacted. And there's a lot of materials that come from various parts of the world that, depending on what the severity of the impact is to those parts of the world, is seriously impacting, you know, our availability of materials in terms of what's being fabricated and manufactured, as well as how those materials are being transported to the sites and to the states, if out of the states. And so a lot of that for us is still being figured out and quantified as far as what that impact might be. But absolutely, make no mistake, there's an impact to the supply chain, and how that's going to, you know, create deadline delays or impacts as it relates to ordering those materials is going to I think, still to be seen, but also is making some pretty immediate impacts on some of our projects.
Yeah,
It's really,
Josh,
I
I agree.
Go ahead, Dennis.
I agree, Josh. We actually, in the last couple of weeks, we've got a leadership team together. We call it our Market Impacts leadership team, and put on SharePoint all of the impacts that we have in different job sites, different offices, just so we know what's going on. And over the last 2 weeks, there's been an increase in material delivery delays due to manufacturing shutdowns or reduced manufacturing staff to comply with social distancing measures. Some examples that we've seen are, light fixtures, light fixture mounting brackets, infrared heaters, specialty doors, architectural woodwork, flooring, where you have a lot of people in a manufacturing facility. And if they have we've had a couple that we've heard from that have had a positive test within their facility. And that obviously impacts our schedules for those specific items. So it is impacting it for sure. Now, I would love to hear how everyone's handling that as far as with their owners. You know, there's not a lot that you can do there. So what we've started to do is just say, you know, explaining to the owner, this is what's going on. Here's the schedule impact, and also brainstorming how can we still meet those schedules, like Jeff was saying, by maybe sequencing it a little bit differently or having staff come at different times, like Jeff was saying. So very, very interesting times.
Agreed.
I agree, Braden. For all of you, many of the members of NAIOP receive a quarterly forecast that I typically put out. Over the last month and a half, I took it a step further, and I was doing a weekly market monitor and reached out to 200 subcontractors in our marketplace. And for the most part, everything that you guys are saying is dead on. It's the manufacturing. It started out overseas. The tile suppliers in Italy, out in China, their plants were getting shut down, and then it was also the transportation and the shipping that started to delay the process. That happened earlier in the March timeframe, March through April. Then in April, I started hearing more about regionally, nationally. There was a mechanical rooftop unit vendor in California that shut down and notified that their products would be delayed. But you guys pretty much hit it on the head, the nail on the head. That's what's impacting us, is the transportation chain cycle, and then manufacturing. What we have seen on one of our projects, and hasn't been in Utah, it's in Texas. We're having gear being an issue right now and being delayed for that project. But the LED lights, like you guys said, that are coming out of China, that has also been the impact.
So kind of shifting gears a little bit, but as you know, uniquely here to Utah in this market, you know, as though the pandemic and COVID-19 wasn't enough, you know, add another sign of the time, which is the earthquakes and the aftershocks that we witnessed over the past, 6 to 8 weeks or so. How are you guys seeing that added complication, if you will, impacting your operations and impacting your projects?
Well, I'll speak up. You know, that first tremor that we felt, that surprised us all. We had some major projects under construction. All our projects along Wasatch Front were were shut down, and it took us. It wasn't a major impact. Some of the projects were up and operation within 24 hours. Others 48 hours. Making sure that we had a structural inspector out there, and we had our crane inspections performed on some of our projects that had the tower cranes. So it varied. For the most part, we were up and running within a day or two. It did impact some of the renovation projects we were doing. We re-looked our sequence of operations so that areas that could be impacted, where we were doing some seismic work, that we took, we changed our operations to make sure that the project wasn't impacted should another tremor come through.
I would say it's interesting because I think for us, and granted, we've only got a handful of projects currently in Utah. I wouldn't say that any of them were immediately impacted, other than kind of just what you indicated, Dennis. But what has been interesting for us is watching how we're in a unique time in Utah, and especially as it relates to the economy and the growth that we're seeing over the past couple of years, how that's trending, and the continued interest of external capital focused on Utah. We have a lot of external customers, and a lot of them who are unfamiliar with Utah and unfamiliar with what is essentially the geographic terrain here. And so there's been a lot of alarm, I would say, from people outside of Utah who have interest in Utah, trying to understand, are we investing in San Francisco all over again? And are we, what does that look like? And so there's been kind of this education, necessary education that's been happening with our conversations with our clients, getting them kind of up to speed on what codes and requirements are from a seismic standpoint here in Utah, and just kind of what to expect, and Certainly what we experienced was a significant seismic activity, but at the same time, it didn't catch us so unawares as a community that buildings were falling down around us, or that we weren't already designing to and installing based on what is a code appropriate for that sort of activity. And so just kind of for us, it's been a matter of just getting all of those other interested parties up to speed on some of the things that are unique to the environment here in Utah, especially as it relates to earthquakes. So it just was curious that it happened at the same time as this pandemic and added to that whole confusion and chaos conversation. Would you guys agree, Braden and Jeff?
Yeah, perfect timing, wasn't it? That morning that happens, like, are you kidding me? But it's funny how time goes by. With each aftershock, my kids all start cheering. Yeah, that was awesome. The surprise is gone. They understand that for the most likelihood they'll be safe. And now they celebrate each aftershock. One thing I did learn from it was it's a good reminder of all of our good structural engineers we have in Utah and how busy they were in the days after that. And then number two, that, all those structural codes do have a purpose. But another thing that we learned was just our emergency plans worked. I walked around the prison site, 190 acres, and I see all these muster stations. I always thought to myself, why in the world do we need muster stations? What kind of event would it really take for us to use them? Well, we used them and it worked, and we're able to quickly account for all the hundreds of workers on site within a matter of minutes after the event. So it's just a good reminder of all the time we spend up front for safety, and that it actually has a reason, and it's actually work. I'm sure you guys have experienced that same scenario.
Yeah, I would agree with Jeff. I think the most impact was mentally, right? Here we are going through the pandemic, and all of a sudden we have an earthquake here in Utah, and owners in California are saying, "Hey, man, this is a Tuesday. When you guys get back to work?" But but really, I think it was a mental impact. There we had some some things that didn't go great, but for the most part, they were very minimal. There wasn't anything that impacted as far as structurally or things like that or safety wise, thankfully. But mostly it was a mental aspect of how do we get our people to feel okay again and safe, and like Jeff said, the practice we have in place, the structural engineers we have are best of class in this state, and our safety individuals throughout the state and all of our competitors as well are really prepared for these kind of things. So that was kind of refreshing to say, look, our plans worked out, like Jeff said, and we're moving forward, and more mentally, how do we get our people to feel okay about continuing to work and making sure their families are safe?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. That could have been a much greater disaster than it was, and it was nice that we were able to kind of come out of it relatively unscathed and test a lot of our procedures and a lot of what we'd already put into place, and realize that those efforts are not wasted, and certainly it's good preparation. But again, at the end of the day, virtually unscathed from I can't remember, what was it, 4.7 or 5.7, a significant activity, but not enough to cause disastrous effect. So I think overall there was a positive there. So, okay, just kind of rounding things out to make sure that this isn't really a doom and gloom sort of conversation. Talk, if you guys all would, about what at least two of your more high profile or more notable projects that are currently working, that are still underway, that people listening to this presentation might be aware of. Braden, you want to go ahead and shoot that off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of obviously the biggest project we have right now is the Salt Lake City Airport. We have a big deadline on September 15th, as everyone knows, because it's posted inside the airport, so that's fun. But that's continuing to go forward, and there's, that's been a daily leadership with not only internally, but obviously our partners there, also our competitors that are there. And it's been really great to see everyone come together and say, how do we keep this very important project going forward and keeping everyone safe? The governor's office has been involved, obviously the airport authority, and it's been very positive to say, hey, this project's still moving forward. There's a lot of people out there from all of our offices, right, and our subcontractors, and so that's a major project, not just for us, but for our economy as a whole, and that's continuing to move forward. But it's changing every day to make sure that we keep things on schedule and keep people safe. So, and then we have our other projects. Again, our warehouse distribution projects throughout the country are still moving forward. The e-commerce is still going strong. I don't see that stopping. Probably going forward even more heavily into the next couple of years. So it's not doom and gloom. I know where all of us are busy, and I think it's continued to be that way, especially in our market, right? Where we've seen in the past where we have a recession, it's usually a year or two after the housing industry, or really any industry, because we do have that backlog that we all try to keep. So I think as an industry as a whole, and especially here in Utah, things are looking up and well for the next couple of years.
Dennis, how about Jacobsen?
Well, with regards to some high-profile projects, many of you know, and we're getting a lot of attention down in Salt Lake City on the Salt Lake Temple, and with seismic events that have happened, it's kind of good that we're on top of that building and doing the work on that structure. But on the developer side, there's two notable projects that are going to change the skyline of Salt Lake City. We broke ground just recently on the West Quarter, formerly known as Block 67 for the Ritchie Group. And you'll be seeing the Liberty Sky project for Cowboy Partners is well underway also. So those are a couple of notable projects on the developer side. On the healthcare side, we do have Primary Children's Lehigh that we're in pre-construction, and it's very positive out there. I mean, those are some high-profile projects that we have that are under construction, other than the PCH Lehigh that's in pre-con. We've got quite a few still in pre-con, and it's very optimistic out there with regards to keep moving forward with all the pre-construction projects we currently have.
How about Layton?
I'm glad you're ending on this note, because there is a lot of good news out there. And the more tower cranes each of us see downtown, there's excitement in that. And I think we need a lot of thanks to our community leaders, Salt Lake Chamber, EDC Utah. A lot of stuff is still going on to make sure that this impact isn't as severe as it could have been. So in terms of good news that or fun project Layton is working on, first and foremost, we're doing our part to make sure football returns. So we're continuing on with the expansion of Rice Eccles Stadium. So we're all anxious to get back in there. We're not sure when or where that will look like, if we're all wearing masks at the game, but either way, we're doing our part to try to make sure football continues on. So we're excited about that. We're doing our part to add an office building downtown with the soon to start 650 Main, 10-story, 300,000+ square foot office building there on Main Street. So we're excited about that. And then nationally, we're excited to continue to be awarded Amazon projects. We did that first project here in Salt Lake and have continued to travel with them. That's been an exciting client for us to have. So still a lot of stuff going on, still exciting. And I think a community is benefited by seeing construction all around them. And I think that will bring confidence that this isn't as bad as it could be, and there's hope for the future through our construction project. So our industry plays an important part of that.
I absolutely concur 100%. And I would say, I think a lot of times we're used to kind of this perception that we're all, especially maybe some of us on the call today, are all looked at as competitors. And certainly we are, but there's a healthy amount of competition that really speaks to what is a healthy industry at the end of the day. And I think there are enough positive indicators out there that we're seeing, some of which you guys just mentioned, a lot of which are both relevant to Utah, but also on a larger national scale, which ultimately leads us to believe that, we're going to work through this. There are plenty of reasons to believe that it's not so dire that we're losing, projects, or we're losing jobs, or that people are aren't going to have, a paycheck in the next week or two or more. Certainly not to dismiss that there are significant considerations, but there are positives. And, some of the projects we're working on, we're seeing data center work across the country that's still just as vibrant, if not more so than ever. Our Facebook project in Eagle Mountain is still moving forward. That is a client who is proactively, like a lot of our clients, kind of issued, instituted change as far as, them indicating that we want to make sure that we are being as conscientious of this issue as we can be. So let's go ahead and assume whatever the delay looks like in order to phase our project and work a schedule that allows for more social distancing and less negative impact than normal. So there's, call it a slight deceleration, if you will, on a project. And that's an owner that's willing to absorb that and whatever those impacts are by way of trying to maintain, what is best for the overall community. So we're seeing a lot of work in the data center world, including Facebook, which continues to move forward. Speaking to the professional sports angle, or at least to sports in general, our sports group is continuing to do work. We're building the Raiders Allegiant Stadium out in Las Vegas right now. And it's continuing to move forward. And there's a deadline there that we intend to uphold, regardless what the NFL dictates is going to be the overall, end schedule that comes from this. So ultimately there's an impact, but the positive note here is that we're all still working towards whatever our deadlines are and maintaining those schedules and still providing a positive impact from a construction standpoint. So before we end up, anything else any of you would like to add by way of the greater community here?
I think we just,
for putting this together.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for your time. It was great insight. It's good to hear what everybody is doing, as we're all kind of isolated, and it's really easy to get, fixated on just what's in front of us. But at the end of the day, there's a greater community. We're all a part of it. We're all contributing to it, and all of us are impacted by what's happening. It sounds like there's a lot of positivity still to be had in at least in the Utah real estate world. So if nothing else, hopefully our NAIOP audience is cognizant of that and takes, some positives from this conversation. So with that, Jade, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for your time. I know all of you are very, very busy. So we at NAIOP appreciate your contribution this morning, and we're very mindful of how valuable your time is. So thank you so much. If you have any other questions for any of these fine gentlemen about what we just talked about, what's going on in the market, the Utah market, feel free to email us. If you have another topic of discussion you'd like to see for a future video, please email Lindsay, naop@naoputah.org. Until then, we will see you all next time. Thank you so much for tuning in.